The question came out of nowhere. Clint Eastwood and his 12-year-old grandson Marcus were sitting on the porch watching the sunset when the boy turned to him and asked, "Grandpa, are you afraid to die?" Clint could have deflected, could have said something generic about being at peace, could have changed the subject the way adults do when children ask uncomfortable questions. But he didn't, because Marcus wasn't asking out of idle curiosity. He was asking because he was afraid, and he needed a real answer.
What Clint said in response, the honest, unfiltered truth about death at 94, didn't just answer the question, it changed how Marcus thought about life, about mortality, about what really matters. And by the end of the conversation, Marcus was crying, not from sadness, but from something deeper, something that would stay with him for the rest of his life.
This is what happened on that porch. Why Marcus asked the question, what Clint answered, and why sometimes the most important conversations we have are the ones we least expect. To understand why Marcus asked the question, you need to know what had happened 2 weeks earlier. 2 weeks before the porch conversation, Marcus's other grandfather, his mother's father, had died. Heart attack. Sudden, no warning. One day he was there, the next day gone. Marcus had been close to him, had seen him regularly, had just talked to him the week before about baseball and school and ordinary things. And then nothing, just absence. The funeral, people crying, adults saying things like he's in a better place and at least he didn't suffer. Words that were supposed to be comforting, but just made the absence more real, more permanent. Marcus didn't cry at the funeral, not because he wasn't sad, but because he was confused, scared, trying to process what death meant, that someone could just stop existing, that all the memories and conversations and moments could end, that it would happen to everyone eventually, even to him. After the funeral, Marcus became quiet, started asking questions his parents didn't know how to answer, started watching his other grandfather, Clint, differently, noticing how old he was, how his hands shook slightly, how he moved slower than he used to, how he looked tired sometimes. Marcus started having nightmares, waking up panicked, checking to make sure his parents were still alive, carrying this low-level anxiety that someone else he loved would disappear, that death was waiting everywhere, that it could take anyone at any time. His parents noticed, tried to talk to him, but 12-year-old boys don't always talk to their parents about existential fears, don't always admit when they're scared of something they can't fight or fix or understand, but they talk to their grandfathers, especially grandfathers who've lived 94 years and aren't afraid of hard questions. The evening of the conversation, Clint had invited Marcus to spend the night. Just the two of them. Clint knew Marcus was struggling, had seen it at the funeral, had noticed how the boy watched him differently now, with that kind of fear mixed with the love, like he was trying to memorize every detail before it was too late. So Clint had called Marcus's parents and suggested the boy spend a night. No special reason, just time together, grandfather and grandson. They'd made dinner, watched a movie, normal things, but Clint was waiting for Marcus to ask whatever was eating at him. They'd gone out to the porch after dinner, Clint's favorite spot, a view of the hills and the setting sun, 2 rocking chairs, the kind of peaceful evening where conversations happen naturally. They sat in silence for a while, comfortable, just being together. Then Marcus spoke. "Grandpa, do you think about dying?" Not the question yet, but close, a warm-up, testing the waters. Sometimes Clint said honestly, "At my age, it's hard not to." "Does it scare you?" And there it was, the real question beneath the question. Not do you think about it, but are you afraid? Because Marcus was afraid, and he needed to know if that fear was normal, if it ever went away, if 94-year-olds who'd lived full lives still felt it. Clint looked at his grandson, saw the fear in his eyes, the need for truth, the silent plea for something that would make the fear smaller, more manageable, less overwhelming. "Are you asking if I'm afraid to die?" Clint said gently. Marcus nodded, unable to speak, because if he spoke, he might cry, and 12-year-old boys don't cry about being afraid. At least they try not to. Clint took a breath, decided to give the real answer, not the comfortable one, not the one that would end the conversation quickly, but the true one, the one that might actually help. What Clint said next was not what Marcus expected.
No.
Clint said simply, "I'm not afraid to die." Marcus looked at him, surprised, maybe disbelieving. How could someone not be afraid of dying, of not existing anymore, of leaving everything and everyone behind? "But I used to be," Clint continued, terrified actually, "when I was younger, maybe your age, maybe older. I was so afraid of death that I tried not to think about it, pushed it away, pretended it wasn't coming. And that fear, that avoidance, it made me make some bad choices."
What kind of choices? Marcus asked quietly.
"I avoided risk, avoided really living sometimes because I was so afraid of dying. I held back from experiences because they might be dangerous, held back from people because losing them would hurt. I treated life like something fragile that might break if I wasn't careful. And you know what that did?" Marcus shook his head. "It made me half alive. I was so busy trying not to die that I forgot to fully live. And that's worse than death, Marcus. That's worse than dying. Living your whole life afraid of the end instead of present in the middle." The sun was lower now, orange and red painting the sky. Clint's weathered face caught the light. 94 years of living visible in every line. "So what changed?" Marcus asked. "How did you stop being afraid?" "I started understanding what death actually is," Clint said, "and what it isn't." And Marcus leaned forward. This was what he needed. Understanding, not platitudes, not religious comfort he wasn't sure he believed, but understanding. "Death isn't the opposite of life," Clint said. "That's the first thing I learned. Death is part of life. It's not the enemy. It's not the failure. It's just the ending. And every good story needs an ending." "But I don't want stories to end," Marcus said, his voice breaking slightly. "I don't want people I love to die. I don't want to die." "I know," Clint said gently. "I know. But here's what I've learned in 94 years. The fact that things end is what makes them precious. If we lived forever, nothing would matter. Every moment would be ordinary because there'd always be another one. But because our time is limited, because every day we get is one day closer to the last, every day matters. Every conversation, every sunset, every moment with people we love." He gestured to the sky. "The sunset is beautiful, partly because it's ending, because in a few minutes it'll be dark. If the sun never set, we wouldn't appreciate the light. The ending is what makes it valuable." "But people aren't sunsets," Marcus said. "No," Clint agreed, "they're not. People are more precious, more complex, more important. But the principle is the same. Your other grandfather, you loved him more, appreciated him more, because somewhere deep down you knew you wouldn't have him forever. Even if you didn't think about it consciously, the limited time is what made every moment with him matter." Marcus was quiet, processing. Clint could see him working through it. 12-year-old mind trying to reconcile death as both loss and meaning maker. "I miss him," Marcus said finally. "Of course you do," Clint replied. "Missing someone means they mattered, means they made an impact, means their life touched yours in ways that don't disappear just because they're gone. The missing is proof that the love was real, and the love doesn't end when the person does." "How do you know?" "Because I still love people who died decades ago. Your great-grandmother, friends who've been gone for years, my parents. The love doesn't die with them. It changes, becomes memory instead of presence, becomes gratitude instead of anticipation. But it doesn't end." Marcus wiped his eyes. "Not quite crying yet, but close." Clint wasn't done. "Here's what I want you to understand," Clint said, "because this is the thing that took me decades to learn. Death isn't the problem. Fear of death is the problem. And fear of death comes from thinking that death is the end of everything. But it's not."
"What do you mean?"
"I mean that death ends a life. But it doesn't end a relationship, doesn't end impact, doesn't end meaning. Your other grandfather is gone. But everything he taught you, still here. Everything he gave you, still here. Every way he shaped who you are, still here. He's not gone. He's just not present. And that's different." Clint leaned back in his chair, looked at the darkening sky. "When I die, and I will probably sooner than later, I won't be afraid. Not because I don't value life, but because I know what I'm leaving behind. I'm leaving you, your father, your cousins, everyone I've loved and taught and tried to help. I'm leaving all the movies I made, all the conversations I had, all the moments that mattered. Those don't die with me, they continue. Yeah, ripple outward. They become part of other people's stories. But you won't be here, Marcus said, tears starting now. No, Clint said honestly, I won't. And you'll miss me. And that's okay. That's good, even, because it means this mattered, this conversation, this sunset, this time together. If you didn't miss me, it would mean I didn't matter. But I do, and you do, and that's bigger than death. The tears were flowing now, Marcus trying to wipe them away, embarrassed. But Clint reached over and put his weathered hand on the boy's shoulder. Let them fall, he said. Tears aren't weakness. They're proof that you love, that you care, that you understand what really matters. That's strength, Marcus. That's being fully alive. I don't want you to die, Marcus said through tears. I know, Clint said, and I'm not planning on it soon. But when I do, when that day comes, I want you to remember this conversation. I want you to remember that I wasn't afraid, not because I didn't love life, but because I lived it fully. I loved deeply. I tried to make a difference. And those things don't end when my heart stops. He pulled Marcus close, let the boy cry on his shoulder. 94-year-old grandfather and 12-year-old grandson, connected by love and conversation, and the honesty that comes when you stop avoiding hard truths. The reason I'm not afraid to die, Clint said quietly, is because I'm not afraid to live. And once you stop fearing death, you can start fully living. You can take risks, love people completely, try things that might fail, be present instead of anxious. Death stops being the enemy and becomes the deadline that makes everything matter. Marcus pulled back, wiped his face, asked one more question. Grandpa, what do you think happens after you die? Clint smiled. The question beneath all questions. I don't know for certain, he said honestly. I have beliefs. I have hopes. I've had experiences, dreams, moments that suggest consciousness continues somehow, that death is a transition, not an ending. But I can't prove it. No one can, not really. Does that scare you? Not knowing. No, Clint said, because here's what I do know. I know that the universe that created consciousness once can create it again. I know that energy doesn't disappear, it transforms. I know that love is real and powerful and seems to transcend physical limits. And I know that whatever comes next, whether it's heaven or nothing or something we can't imagine, it's not something to fear. How do you know it's not something to fear? Because the same force that created this world, this sunset, this love we feel for each other, that force isn't malicious, isn't cruel. Whatever created beauty and love and consciousness doesn't end it in horror. The ending might be mysterious, but I don't think it's terrible. Clint looked at his grandson, and even if I'm wrong, even if death is just lights out, nothing after, even then I'm not afraid, because I will have lived fully, completely. I will have loved you, taught you, been here with you on this porch, watching this sunset, having this conversation, and that's enough. That makes life worth living, even if death is final. Marcus was quiet. The tears had stopped. Something in his face had shifted, not from fear to certainty, but from fear to peace, from anxiety to acceptance. I think I understand, he said. Tell me what you understand, Clint said. That death is sad, but not bad. That missing people is okay. That being afraid is normal, but living afraid is wrong. That loving people, even though they'll die, is better than not loving them because they will. That you're not scared because you lived right, and that I don't need to be scared either if I live right too. Clint felt his own eyes get wet. 12 years old, and the boy had understood, had taken the fear and transformed it into wisdom. That's exactly right, Clint said. That's exactly right. They sat together as darkness fell. The conversation wasn't over. They talked for another hour. About life, about memories, about what mattered, about how to live without fear, about gratitude and presence and love. Marcus asked about Clint's life, what moments he remembered most, what he was proudest of, what he'd do differently. And Clint answered honestly, sharing not achievements but connections, not awards but conversations, not success but love. When they finally went inside, Marcus was different. Not cured of grief, not free from all fear, but changed, carrying something new, a perspective that would shape how he lived the rest of his life. That night, Marcus slept peacefully for the first time since his grandfather's death. No nightmares, no anxiety, just rest. Because he understood now, death was part of life, fear was optional, and living fully was the only response that made sense. In the months after, Marcus's parents noticed the change. Their son was different, more present, more grateful, more willing to try new things, more affectionate with family, more aware that time was limited and therefore precious. They asked what happened on that porch with Grandpa Clint. Marcus tried to explain, but some conversations are too profound to fully capture in retelling. He could share the words, but the feeling, the transformation that was his to carry. 3 years later, when Clint did eventually pass away peacefully in his sleep at 97, Marcus was sad, cried, missed him deeply, but he wasn't destroyed because he remembered the conversation, remembered that Clint hadn't been afraid, remembered that love didn't end with presence, remembered that the impact of a life continued in the people it touched. At the funeral, Marcus spoke, told the story of the porch conversation, of asking his grandfather if he was afraid to die, of the answer that changed everything, of learning at 12 years old that death wasn't the enemy, fear was, that living fully was possible, only when you stopped avoiding the ending. The funeral attendees cried, not just from sadness, but from recognition, from realizing they'd been living afraid, from wanting what Clint had, that peace, that acceptance, that ability to face death without terror because he'd faced life without holding back. Marcus kept the rocking chair from that porch, put it in his own home years later, would sit in it sometimes and remember the sunset, the conversation, the tears, the transformation, the grandfather who loved him enough to tell him the truth instead of the comfortable lie. And whenever Marcus's own children asked hard questions about death or fear or meaning, he would sit them down and tell them what his grandfather had told him, that death was part of life, that fear was optional, that love didn't end, that living fully was the only way to face mortality, that tears were strength, that missing people was proof they mattered. A conversation on the porch had lasted maybe an hour, but its impact lasted a lifetime. Because Clint Eastwood at 94 had given his 12-year-old grandson something more valuable than comfort. He'd given him truth. He'd given him permission to live without fear. He'd given him a framework for facing mortality that transformed it from terror to meaning. Grandpa, are you afraid to die? No, because I'm not afraid to live. 7 words, but they contained a philosophy, an approach to existence, a way of transforming fear into fuel, of letting the certainty of death make life more precious instead of more terrifying, of understanding that the ending doesn't diminish the story, it completes it. Marcus never forgot, never stopped being grateful, never stopped living the way his grandfather had taught him, fully, presently, without fear of the ending, because he was too busy being present in the middle. In 94, Clint Eastwood had lived through wars and success and loss and joy, had faced death many times in roles in reality and the quiet moments when age reminds you that time is finite, and he'd learned that the fear of death was worse than death itself, that living afraid was dying slowly, that peace came not from avoiding the end but from embracing the middle. That's what he gave Marcus on that porch. Not false comfort, not false comfort, not religious platitudes he wasn't sure the boy would believe, but truth, hard, honest, liberating truth, that death was real, that it would come, that it was okay to be sad about it, but that living in fear of it was the only real tragedy. A 12-year-old boy asked his 94-year-old grandfather if he was afraid to die, and the answer, honest, profound, transformative, made him cry, not from fear, but from understanding, from the recognition that love was stronger than death, that life was precious because it was temporary, that living fully was the only response to mortality that made sense. The tears on that porch weren't weakness. They were awakening. They were the moment fear transformed into wisdom. They were proof that the most important conversations we have are the ones we're most afraid to start. And they were the beginning of a life lived without fear, without holding back, without treating death as the enemy instead of the deadline that makes everything matter. Clint Eastwood gave his grandson many things over the years, but the greatest gift was that conversation, that honesty, that truth about death that made life more beautiful instead of more terrifying. And Marcus carried it forever.